All right, beautiful. Hello, good morning, everyone. Really nice to have you all here today. I'm seeing we have nearly 3 pages worth of people, so I'm thinking that's a lot. Thank you for joining today's session called Housing and Survivors of the Sex Trade. Before I start sharing my screen and my presentation with my colleague Desiree Damos, I just want to give ourselves an opportunity to introduce ourselves. My name is Tempe Staples. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the Director of Research and Development at Living in Freedom Together. Desiree.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here. My name is Desiree Demos. I am a survivor of the sex trade and also the Senior Director of Community-Based Programs here at Living in Freedom Together.
Awesome. All right, I'm going to move to share my screen and we will get started on our presentation this morning. Please hold. All right. So as we mentioned, Desiree and I have been with LIFT now for about 3 years, and Desiree works more directly in direct services, and I am part of our program evaluation department. Just for housekeeping, so folks know, we're going to hold all of our questions till the end, but I do want to invite folks to utilize the chat. If you think of questions along the way and you just want to mark those, we will have plenty of time at the end of our presentation for discussion. So without further ado, Desiree, I will turn it over to you.
Awesome. So Living in Freedom Together, LIFT Worcester, is a nonprofit organization that provides services, support, and resources and advocacy for survivors of the sex trade. It is a combination of survivors who have exited and allies working together to make sure we're providing like quality exit service and continued exiting support to end systems of prostitution through the implementation of the equality model in Massachusetts. Here at LIFT, we believe that survivors don't just need to be at the table, that they need to be making decisions at the table. So a lot of places, are survivor informed or lived experience informed, which means they bring people to the table, they want them to share their stories, they want them to be part of it, but they don't always necessarily think that those people should be making the decisions. But we have found that the way to actually make systematic changes is for the people who are trapped inside those systems to be part of the decision-making process. So we work to end demand and hold people accountable while providing continued advocacy and support for survivors. Sorry, I skipped ahead. I did 2 slides in one. Next. Okay. Nope. Are my slides out of order? What happened here?
No, I'm just excited to talk about survivor-led. Sorry, friend.
We just want to keep blasting that at people, right? Just make sure you leave here knowing one thing, that we're survivor-led. And that means our board, our executive directors, our direct service, our advocacy work, all of that is survivor-led. 70% or more actually at this time are survivors or people in long-term recovery.
Good.
Yeah, good.
So we just wanted to provide kind of this visual. We are certainly not going to talk about every single program that we have at Living in Freedom Together, but it's helpful just to understand our ecosystem of programs and how we organize ourselves. And obviously today we're talking about housing, so we're going to be talking to you at the end of today's presentation about one of our newer programs called HOUSE, which stands for Housing and Unconditional Support. As Des mentioned, we are centrally located in Worcester, Massachusetts, but we have statewide reach. LIFT was incorporated officially as a nonprofit in 2016, and since then we have exponentially grown to be the proud owners of 3 properties and locations here in Worcester, and we serve nearly 500 individuals each year, from shelter to street outreach to our more stabilized residential treatment programs. HOUSE is one spoke of our hub harbor, which stands for Housing Advocacy Room Board Outreach and Rehousing, and that will be the focus of today's presentation. So we want to talk a little bit about our population, which includes, of course, people who have experienced systems of prostitution, and that systems of prostitution are systems of gender-based violence. This sounds almost obvious when we say it out loud, but oftentimes in our work, as I'm sure many of you have experienced, what's obvious to you as the organization is not always obvious to the grantor, the politician, the collaborator. So we're going to talk a little bit about the intersections of different social determinants of health that survivors, you'll hear us use that term a lot. That could mean survivor of prostitution, survivor of sex trafficking. Often we know individuals have experienced both and they are not mutually exclusive. They're just terms that are often used exclusively in court settings. So prostitution is not only discrimination, exploitation, and abuse by an individual. Disproportionately, we know that those who are exploiting others tend to actually be, more often than not, white men of means. And more often than not, it is Black and brown women who are being exploited at the hands of this particular population. We bring this up because it's important to understand power imbalances in systems of prostitution and systems of care. Oftentimes we will hear, why does this matter? It does. It matters a lot. If we're talking about equity and we're talking about housing, we have to talk about just the different groups that can wield power over others. And today, this is a presentation that very much is focused on how women are exploited in the sex trade and how more often than not, they are left out of access to care, access to resources, and access to exiting the sex trade. Systems of prostitution, as we mentioned, can look like many different things and come in many different forms. This can include stripping, phone sex lines, familial pimping. We know that more often than not, it's unfortunately a family member, man or woman, who is creating that on-ramp into the sex trade. Forms of internet-based exploitation, sex trafficking, erotic nude massage parlors, escort services, and private parties.
Prostitution, prostitution tends to, people tend to view prostitution as like a victimless crime, right? Like somehow they believe that the exchange of money erases like the violence that that survivors are experiencing. But there's actually, and like people try to like normalize, they want to normalize prostitution, right? But there's nothing normal about a man, thinking like he can exchange like goods and services to access another person's body. It increases rape culture. It is the only system, or it is the only crime where we actually charge the person being exploited, and we often do not actually arrest the exploiters, right? Like earlier, somebody was talking about, white men of means purchasing access to the bodies of women and girls, right? And those aren't the people that are getting arrested. If you look at any general area, the amount of prostitution like related arrest significantly outnumbers the amount of men that are arrested during these things. There's no, like, where there's a power imbalance, there can't actually be any consent, right? That's anywhere, and it doesn't change. It doesn't change just because people think that this is like a choice, right? Prostitution, you often hear us say that prostitution is the choice for the people with the fewest choices. Some people even think like that, like we have our bill right now for the equality model. The opposition to us is people who are trying to push for the legalization of prostitution, and that would make any area basically like a sex tourism site. So if your state legalizes prostitution, you now have all these predators that are like flocking to your state because it's now legal. We see that people don't, there are a significant amount of men that just don't purchase the bodies of women and girls because it is illegal. And if we were to move in a direction where we legalize that and we keep normalizing that, what that does is it increases demand. And when you increase demand, there's already not enough willing participants, right? Like sometimes like a lot of people think that trafficking is different than prostitution, right? It's all trafficking. Even the state of Massachusetts, like trafficking is any coercion, to trade your body for sex or goods, right? So trafficking, prostitution, exploitation, like you cannot divorce those things. And the amount of violence that's experienced, like the money doesn't erase that. Right? Like, it's not like, oh, and oftentimes that's really how it is, right? So even though somebody agrees to a certain exchange, it usually doesn't stop there. Women are murdered. The average time that a woman can be, that is in the life is 7 years. And so either you exit or you have died, right, at the hands of a sex buyer due to substance use disorder. Substance use disorder is one of the vulnerabilities that makes people vulnerable to traffickers, recruitment of traffickers. So we have to stop going in the direction where we're normalizing that. Social media does that a lot. They make it seem like it's bodily autonomy, and this is the feminist way, like I should be able to do what I want with my body, and they really glorify the sex trade, and we're heading in a direction where it's going to increase violence. And when you just because it's legal won't make it any less violent. There's no evidence whatsoever that the legalization would make it less violent. So people are still going to need to exit the life. And that's why the importance of continued exiting support, whether through any of our programs with the shelter, the treatment facility, right, and the housing, like we have to provide continued exit support for women to be able to escape the violence.
Thanks, Desiree. So we're going to now be moving into talking a little bit more about specifically our population and our program information to help paint the picture and understand how is it that one even enters the sex trade in the first place, but then also what are the factors at hand that prevent individuals from entering housing or shelter as well. So this is based on Living in Freedom Together's 2021 and 2022 impact data. So we serve a range of individuals across a demographic diversity. So at the moment, we know that 10% of our current participants identify as Black, 22% identify as Latinx or Hispanic. We know, sadly, that 90% have told us and informed us within 6 months of them being in our program that at one point in their childhood, they experienced sexual violence. We also know that 70% meet the criteria to be diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. We are aware that 75% at one point in their adult life have experienced unstable housing or homelessness. 80% at one point in their life have been victims of rape or sexual violence, as we mentioned. And 96% felt that they wanted to leave the sex trade. They wanted to exit, but they felt that they had little to no options. So to echo Desiree, prostitution is the choice of those with the fewest choices. And we know that that is an experience of the majority of our program participants and those who identify as survivors who are our staff members. And it's really important that we drive that home because when we're speaking in terms of the law and we're asked essentially, well, it was her choice to do this, why should she get access to resources? We first have to start with that breakdown of that is a myth, that this is a choice that is not actually quite framed in an accurate way. We also want to highlight here that obviously there are instances and social determinants of one's well-being that were unprotected factors that allowed a vulnerability to enter the sex trade in the first place. So we know that the majority of those we're serving, they've already been through it early on in life, and there were stumbling blocks and pieces of their life that were not supported along the way that led to this outcome of being homeless, experiencing homelessness, experiencing prostitution, experiencing substance use disorder, and the violence that comes with that. Pardon me as I move my block here. As we mentioned as well, there is a scheme of cross-victimization that our population experiences. So the intersection of two different forms of vulnerability. As we mentioned, 97%, 96 to 97, it varies from 2021 to 2022. Participants have reported experiencing sexual assault and violence. 35% in 2021 specifically informed us that they had experienced stalking, and 62% reported that they were currently experiencing violence from an intimate partner. So again, this goes back to, unfortunately, perpetration of violence often happens by someone who we already know and that we're close with. In 3 of these instances, the abusive partner have identified as a high-risk perpetrator, high risk for lethality as measured by Jacqueline Campbell's dangerous assessment. If you want to learn more about that, I can share that at the end. And by the Worcester Domestic Violence High-Risk Team, and are being continually monitored by team members within this criminal justice system. So we just wanted to acknowledge that. Sorry, I have to... The joy of Zoom, you have to like really move things. So other factors that are contributing to people's vulnerabilities. And I want to also acknowledge this is something we present on a lot, and it's easy to fly through, but I really want folks to sit with this for a moment. These are hard stats to constantly share. It is really, really difficult to go through this information because these are people who we work with on a daily basis. We know that 97% of our crew has experienced or is experiencing substance use disorder. 65% currently are experiencing homelessness or unstable housing. They don't have a steady place to live. We know that the majority have unmet needs due to unaddressed trauma, shame, and the stigma of being a prostituted person. We know that it's common for women to be rearrested within days of release from jail. So 10% last year experienced rearrest within a month of their release from jail, and 3% get rearrested often just within a week. And just to also paint a picture, this can just look like you have a record of common street walking and you are just walking down the street in general and you are identified by law enforcement, you can just get arrested. That is a real thing that happens. We have worked significantly on mitigating that in Worcester, but we want to highlight the reality that that is something you can be working on your recovery, going to class, you happen to have a record, you happen to get identified, you can get arrested on the spot and you're not even doing anything wrong. So you can imagine being in that position where you're trying to, quote, do the right thing. You're trying to get your life together. You have authority figures informing you this is what you need to do to better yourself, to get a job, to get a home. And yet you're trying to do all the right things and you're still getting arrested. There is a huge fallout of trust there, as you can imagine, with, of course, law enforcement, but also with leadership in systems of care. And that's something that here at LIFT we're really trying to work on, is building that trust back with people. Why would you want to engage in a system that is going to criminalize you? One second, this is not, there we go.
Well, since we opened Harbor, now we did know the reality is that many people are being excluded from housing, but we've really been able since we opened Harbor to like hone down what those reasons are and work on ways to help navigate those systems. Many of the women that we work with have criminal records, whether it's a prostitution related charge like common street walking, or a possession charge, or a theft charge, or a break and entering. We've had women that like got a charge while they were like defending themselves against a sex buyer, right? Or something was happening and they drove off in their car. There's lots of charges that can be accumulated while you're in the sex trade that don't fall under that umbrella of like, so even as we move forward, like with understanding that like prostitution is the choice for the people with the fewest choices, and that this shouldn't be something that stays on their permanent record. This shouldn't be something that defines them moving forward. We still are allowing all those other charges to stick, and those are the ones that are really excluding people from housing. So some of the barriers are the criminal records. They can't pass a Corey check. Vital documents. I can't tell you how many people we have now. We have a very small shelter. It's only 16 beds, but I like to say it's the favorite one in the city, which it is. But all the shelters are full right now, right? All of them. There has been a significant increase in homelessness given given inflation and the raising of rents around the city. And so what that happens is that puts non-stigmatized people into shelters and then pushes the stigmatized people out, right? So the people that are easiest to work with, the people that have kids, like those are the ones filling up the shelters right now. And that like leaves no beds for people with substance use disorder, with co-occurring mental health, surrounding sex trade. So like some of the other issues is that mail, right? And I know that in Massachusetts, actually, I'm very happy to hear they are looking at a way to start sending somebody on site at shelters to work on things like housing and benefits and stuff like that, and have like a central like database for it, so they're not waiting. So people get mail. This happens all the time here. Somebody will come here and we're doing their intake and we're trying to figure out what their next move is. They're like, oh, I'm waiting on housing. And we're like, oh, that's great, right? But we also know that could take like 2.5 years. I mean, I've seen people on a wait list for housing up to 7 years, not just once, but multiple times. And so we do have to work on other things in the meantime. But like when it really is kind of like disappointing to me when somebody works really hard on housing with like our case managers and stuff, and like they get something in the mail, but they're no longer staying at our shelter. So while they can still continue to get their mail here and check in, it doesn't happen a lot, right? When you don't have any stability, when you're unsheltered, you're transient, you're moving around a lot. So sometimes when that moment comes where they're actually going to get the housing, they're not here to do the paperwork and it has to be in 10 days, right? Substance use disorder keeps a lot of people from housing. With LIFT, we believe that people don't need, like sobriety shouldn't be mandated for people to access basic needs. And so we're really working like on changing that mindset. And I know a lot of other organizations are too, right? Housing first. That means you put somebody in housing and then you work on all the other issues, because you can't work on any issues while you're unsheltered. When there's no stability, you can't actually work on anything. So housing first is a model that I know a lot of people are working towards. And in theory, I think it sounds good to people, but nobody's really, like, a lot of people aren't putting in effort to actually make it happen or what that looks like. But we are, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Evictions keep people out of housing all the time, right? But those aren't always like valid. I've had people that I work with that have an eviction on their record because a man in their life at one of the intersections of domestic violence and exploitation was dealing drugs, and so she got evicted from her housing, and this was 1996, and she still cannot get housing. She is sober, so she meets all the requirements of somebody who could like live on their own and take care of things and pay their bills. She has an income, but because of this eviction in 1996, she's not able to get housing. So the reality is that people can still hold down housing even with substance use disorder. Like, let's be real with that. People have neighbors that drink, right? But they pay their mortgage and they go to work and they take care of their families, right? So giving people like a chance to also do that is really important.
Sorry. So we want to talk a little bit about our program, House, which actually started back in 2019. when we first engaged in a program called Thrive with the YWCA of Central Massachusetts. So that was really the beginning of what was going to become a continuum of housing options for survivors of the sex trade. Pardon me, I have allergies, so I might need to cough a little bit. Okay. But so Thrive, we are a subrecipient of a federal grant opportunity. The YWCA of Central Mass is the primary subrecipient or grantee. And this gave us the opportunity to move individuals who were either in our shelter over at Harbor or at Jana's Place, our 16-bed residential program, where folks tend to stay for at least a year, and they're really committed to their recovery in a collective unit. Thrive is kind of like the next step, where you have graduated from Jana's Place, you have entered full recovery, you are seeking volunteering opportunities, you are seeking a job, and you're moving into more independent living, but in a stabilized kind of structure where you still have access to the LIFT community, case management, and other on-site resources. And Thrive is amazing, but we knew that it was only going to be the start of what we wanted to be for our housing continuum. And what I mean by continuum is we really do believe that you need to have access to high quality resources. In this case, let's talk about housing. Every step of the way, no matter where you're at in your journey on recovery from substance use disorder or your exit from the sex trade, we want to make sure that you have healthy, happy communal shelter that meets the needs of this specific population. So just this past year, we were thrilled to become the recipients of 3 housing program grants, one of which we will really focus on today anecdotally. It's from HUD, and we are part of the continuum of care here in Worcester, and so we are now the subrecipients of a HUD grant for stabilized housing. And we work with Central Mass Housing Alliance on this specific program. And so what this looks like is we are seeking out a new property that can be treated just really like any of our other programs, but it's immediately to get folks into high quality housing in community with other survivors who know and understand this experience, to have mental health first aid on site 24/7, and to have case management in general and legal services on site 24/7 to support folks from the very beginning of their stages through the recovery, and also to offer access to other resources, all while being housed. And so we're really excited as we get this started. The 2 other programs, they will be similar. They will be at their own locations as well, but they'll be in more progressive forms of recovery. So the second form being, we expect you to be in the house for at least 12 to 24 months. And at this point, you've graduated, you are in recovery, you're committed to that, you are not using, and you're starting to look for jobs. And our other program called BRAVE, Building Real Access to Viable Employment, would support that. And then the final housing step would be right before someone is to kind of launch off into finding their own apartment, get reunified with their children, and so on and so forth. So it's all about a gradient of care instead of just, you're not ready, now you're allowed in this house. Every step of the way, you're supported. But it has been a journey in order to obviously, 1, acquire these contracts, but 2, to get them to be formulated in a way that we felt was appropriate and accommodating for the survivor population. As we mentioned before, people have been through it. And we also are well aware that mostly the women who we've worked with have endured severe trauma, be it in foster care, in other shelter systems, unfortunately, in other systems of housing. And so when we initially received our HUD contract, it was required, as stated by HUD, the individuals have to live alone in single room occupancies. And immediately our team went, eek, we don't
feel good about that. We know that our people need to live in community. That doesn't mean we want to deprive anybody of private quality living space. It just means that maybe if I'm recovering from substance use disorder and mental health disorders, I don't really want to be alone. I think we've all endured through the pandemic that wasn't always a really good time. And so we actually consulted with our program participants and some of our named staff members, and we asked them if they consented to share with us their stories about housing. And this is some of what they shared with us. From Ryan, who's one of our survivor advocates, she shared that community living had been foundational for her continued success in sobriety. Isolation had been always one of her biggest triggers. And once she had found having another woman as a roommate, it felt really validating and conducive to encourage the lifestyle that she really wanted to pursue. And without having that connection, she really believes to this day that she might not have been able to sustain her recovery. Another participant from our shelter shared that she had turned down housing. And as we know, that's really hard to get in the past because she was afraid to live alone. That's how important it is for us to be able to provide communal living. And so we actually worked on writing a very lengthy letter to HUD, signed off by quite a number of individuals, and we gave it to Central Mass, and they helped to broker a conversation and a deal that actually resulted in us getting a contract amendment. So instead of having to put people in single room occupancy now, we're able to put them in one big communal space. And we share that for two reasons. One, this work requires so much advocacy. I honestly did not fully anticipate an expedited amendment the way we did. Obviously, with love to the federal government, it moves slow. So we were really pleased to be able to make this change for folks. And we wanted to use this opportunity here in our presentation to share and encourage that if you ever get a contract or a grant that you don't quite agree with all of the terms, it's worth it to push back a little bit and to obviously not exploit anybody's story, but consult and ask if you are willing and wanting to share and use your voice to make change in the program. Do that. We do that here all the time. And that's what we mean by survivor led. And Desiree, I want to give you an opportunity here if you want to note anything.
No, that was beautiful. I do want to say though, I wanted to mention our legal clinic, because that's a little bit of a game changer through all these things. It helps to identify the problems, but it doesn't help if we don't have solutions. And so we actually, our legal clinic just launched. We have 2 paralegals and an attorney, and they work on things like family law, criminal cases, housing, and so connecting survivors, like having a home base for them to be while we connect them with the people that can remedy situations while they're on site at our programs is critical. So the legal clinic is able to, once they are in our like 3 to 6 month program in our house program, once they're in that, they'll be able to work with our legal clinic. So they can work on that through any Harbor, John's Place, Brave, the employment program. Employment and housing kind of go hand in hand, right? But our legal team connecting with participants very early on at any of our programs to help like remove some of the things that may be on their record, or to fight a HUD guideline, right, is really important as well. So, but thank you. Some of you did great at that last little bit there. I don't have much to add.
The choice of contracts. But yes, so essentially landing on that anecdote of how we were able to affect this change and the rollout of the housing program this year, that actually concludes this portion of the presentation, because we really wanted to make this as engaging of a dialogue as possible. So I think I saw a couple things drop into the chat, but we do want to open the floor for Questions of any kind and any discussion points? And pardon as I attempt to make housekeeping happen here. There are so many moving parts on my screen. Pardon me, I'm going to attempt to pronounce your name. Wei Ling, is that how I pronounce your name?
Yes, thank you very much.
Beautiful name.
Thanks
Yes, please.
for recognizing me. I am the executive director of this small organization called Amherst Community Connections, and we are located in Amherst. And recently, about a year and a half ago, we received a grant from the Department of Public Health. And the target audience that we want to serve are the following. One, it's people who have substance use disorder and people who also experience chronic homelessness. But in addition, the grant also carved some units out for people who experience, in addition to chronic homelessness, are people who have experienced sexual exploitation. So it's a low threshold housing program, meaning we follow housing first. We do not ask for sobriety. We do not insist they have to be clean to enter the program. That's not in the program at all. And to the extent we do not do their CORI check in order to screen them out, if anything, we want to screen them in because of the CORI can be act as a barrier. So my question to you folks who have been in the field for so long is that what would you recommend as the best way to engage people who need a service, namely people who are in the sex trade work? Because looking at your data, you mentioned about 75% of them experience homelessness. And yet, sex trade is illegal in Massachusetts. So we are having a little bit maybe challenge here, how to reach out to people who can benefit from our service. So I would really appreciate any guidance from you. And the audience, if you happen to be serving people who you know are being sexually exploited, are in need of housing, I have put my contact information in the chat. You can definitely reach out to me directly to make referrals. But as a guidance, I want to reach out to you how we can do so in the most sensitive, respectful way, and yet able to reach out to them quickly. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That is absolutely wonderful to hear. I am so glad we were able to make this connection today. I wrote down your contact information. It'd be great if we could share, I would love to see like a one-pager on your low threshold housing, and knowing that we have that somewhere. So sometimes we do have people, how far is Amherst, Tempe?
It's probably an hour from
It's not far. So we do occasionally get people that are not from here. They're not really from anywhere, kind of like me. I feel people are like, where are you from? I'm like, up and down the East Coast. But we get people that it wouldn't make a difference. It wouldn't impact them negatively to go somewhere outside of the area. As a general rule of thumb, we don't like to send people outside because sometimes that creates more vulnerabilities than there were to begin with. The same as we don't like to take people from Florida, right? Because now they're, they're using the tools in their own toolbox to survive in Worcester. And that doesn't always work out well. You just make them more vulnerable than trying to access their own community resources. But this being so close, but not super close, I do think that we could utilize this. Like already when you started talking, I was already like thinking about people and where they like, so yeah, I would love to connect for sure. How many beds do you have specific? Are they specific for survivors of the sex trade, a couple of them, or is it just an overall?
We have 15 beds altogether.
Okay.
It's fully occupied. However, we are meeting with the officials in the coming month, and we are hoping to advocate for another 10 to 15 beds.
Great, great.
Yeah, and we want to emphasize, if we do get additional 10 or 15 beds, we, in our letter to them, that we want to dedicate half of them to people who are the survivor of sex trades or people who have experienced sexual exploitation. And right now in the program, currently, we have 16 people in the 15 units. About 9 of them have indicated in their disclosure to us they are survivors of sex trades or people have experienced sex exploitations.
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of so when people are going through different programs and stuff through the recovery process, you could be, I say it all the time, I could be in like a sober house with like 8 other women, and we'll be sitting there like trying to have group when we should be talking about things to like heal and things that like, you know, that induce trauma, right? And like nobody will talk about it, but all of us have experienced it. A lot of people look at it like for example, for me, I didn't know I was a survivor until I worked for a survivor-led organization. All I know is that the job description sounded a lot like my life. And I was like, yeah, this is for me. But it wasn't until I worked here that I realized that I actually wasn't the one making these decisions. That I thought it was like survival, right? And this was my fault because I did drugs. And so this is, you know what I mean? And so people don't often disclose that till they're in an environment around other survivors. Do you have survivors on your staff there at the low threshold housing?
Yes, we do.
Awesome. All right. I know where we're sending people. Let me know if you need any support getting those, like if you need us to reach out and tell them how beneficial it would be for 5 extra beds in the state for sex trade survivors, because I'll do that.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I also wanted to speak to the fact, you know, I think one of the questions that was raised was how are we engaging with this population in the first place? Because as we mentioned at the top, trust in the system is challenging. It is definitely a challenge for many of the individuals whom we work with. And LIFT, just in the very beginning and the infancy of this organization, we were a drop-in center. And so it was purely just a small space where women who were experiencing homelessness and the sex trade and substance use disorder, they could pop in, get something to eat, you know, see their sisters, and then head right on out again. And that eventually then expanded into street outreach. And street outreach is one of our most prolific activities and definitely something that we want to be able to be committing more of our resources to, because it takes a lot of time, heart, and dedication, and definitely time to debrief about. But we know just based on our own impact data, being able to make those warm handoff, face-to-face connections with folks who are living out in the woods, living on the sidewalk, living, you know, behind that warehouse, and going to them consistently every day, it takes about an average of 7 points of contact for that individual to say voluntarily, yes, I would like to personally self-refer myself to the shelter. I would like to get in the mobile outreach unit and come with you. We don't make anyone come with us, but just that instance of being able to go out to where they are and meet them where they're at, it starts off that domino effect of like, yes, I do want to come to the shelter. Yes, I am feeling more secure and safe now. Yes, I would be interested in maybe moving into Jana's place. And that can have a cascading ripple effect because now you're in our hub and you can actually access all of the resources. You don't have to, we don't make anyone do anything. It has to be their choice. But I think if we were not doing street outreach, we would not be seeing the numbers that we do have, and we wouldn't have built the bridges that we've created or the trust that we've created. And so much of that is honestly in credit to Desiree and her incredible team. It takes a lot of hard work. Obviously, we're all here. We know this work. No one's here for the paycheck and no one's here for the glory. This is, you know, coming from a real place of data-driven love, as I like to call it. But it really starts with meeting people with where they're at. I also wanted to acknowledge you, Jennifer, in the chat. I see you're also a recipient of this program from DPH. That's really exciting. We would love to connect with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Yes, actually, your organization came up just recently because we here in Springfield, we're working on a big model for street outreach, because we also do street outreach, and we're working on doing capacity building. We're adding different stakeholders in the community to join our outreach group, everybody with a different expertise, you know, from medical professionals to folks in the field. We've been working with My Life, My Choice, and they actually had asked us to also reach out to you folks since you're in the Worcester area, because this DPH contract is across the board in Massachusetts. There's about, I think there's 9 of us that have the contract, and out towards you, SMOC also has the contract to do it. So at some point, yeah, I would love to reach out to you folks. So thank you.
Yeah, that'd be great. So we actually, we're in the jail up there in Chicopee.
Oh.
Yeah, we do a group there with the women, and we're also, we just got a contract for more hours up there to start doing the surveys when people are going through the booking process to find out like who has a history of exploitation, to connect them with services. And so we meet a lot of women from that area specifically too, because we're not just working with Worcester, Worcester women. When we're there, we're working with whoever's there and has experienced exploitation. So I would definitely love to connect. We're regularly getting phone calls from Springfield, and they want to come here because there's nowhere out there for, you know what I mean? So that would be great. Is your email in here?
Yeah, Desiree, I'm going to put my contact information up, and I also work a lot with Wei Ling. And Wei Ling, thank you for being back. I was worried about you. So that would be great. I'll put my contact information, and thank you very much. And thank you all for doing this training. It's wonderful.
Thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I know we are at our time, but I do want to invite the opportunity for any more comments or questions in the next 3 minutes.
Hi, my name's Shauna. I actually, I have the sister contract to both Waylon and Jennifer over in Lowell. One of my questions is, so, they've identified that we do, support victims of sex trafficking as a part of this contract. What our experiences have been is the women are very forthcoming about, talking about that. Our males, we've had to develop relationships and comfort for them to come out and say that they're also victims of this. So I don't know if you guys had sort of any suggestions when supporting the men who fall under this population.
Shauna, I'm sorry, could you just repeat the question one last time for me?
Yeah, so sorry. Yeah, so what we've noticed is so our females are very forthcoming and very open and honest. What we've noticed with our male participants, them identifying as victims of sex trafficking, it won't come out right away. It really takes time in developing comfort and a relationship with them to be able to come out and share that with us. So I just didn't know, in regards to the two different sexes, if you had any suggestions in regards to supporting men who are victims of sex trafficking as well.
So go ahead.
Oh no, go for it.
Okay, we work with female identifying survivors. That is our population. We have had men reach out, but I would say we would be right where you're at with that. I don't have solutions for somebody who is not female identifying. So like finding out the problem, I'm going to feel terrible if I don't have solutions. It doesn't mean like we can't move towards that. But I am glad to hear that somebody is actually because we do have people reach out to us, right? And I do feel kind of like what can I do to help you? You know, like I don't have anybody to connect them to, because I don't know who else in the state is working with male survivors. So I'm sorry I don't have a great answer for you, but I would like, when you know, if you're working, I would like to get in a place where we could move towards that too, at least know if we're not the ones that are working with them, like who, you know, who's the best to do that. Tempe, you got
Thank
it?
you.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, just to echo Desiree, there's a lot of wonderful organizations in Worcester, and while their mission is not specific to the sex trade, I am aware that, you know, Legendary Legacies, 508, and Des, what is Derek Kaiser's organization?
Fresh start.
Fresh
No.
Start. They're working with a number of really incredible young and older men, or, you know, male identifying individuals who have certainly endured their fair share of inequity in our patriarchal white system. And even though it's a bit harder, as we're aware, for men in general to be more open about sexual exploitation in their past, you know, they do have programs where that kind of brotherhood and open communication is fostered. So if folks would be interested in getting connected with like Ron Waddell or Derek Kaiser, I think that is, you know, an email exchange that we'd be happy to initiate.
Thank you, Tempe.
I wanted to
Thank
acknowledge Justin Fernandez. Sorry, did you have a question?
Yes, I had a question connected to what you guys were discussing about male victimization. How about in terms of having discussions with trying to understand from the perpetrator's perspective why those things are happening, like beyond what the research is currently showing? Like, have you guys considered looking into that as far as examining the other angle?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So, but we are big on not like catching the babies down the river, but going up and finding out where they're throwing them in. We are working on a male prevention curriculum right now, as requested by one of the high schools in our area. And so before we did participate for a small portion of the CARD program. So the CARD program in Massachusetts is for when people get arrested, when the men get arrested in the buyers stings, and they sit through a course at the police department with Maureen Casey, and I forget who actually does that with her. And they really like I've sat for longer portions of what we're just there for, just to kind of like hear the things that are being said. And most men, when they come in there, have the idea that like this was a decision made by two consenting adults, and this is not I didn't do anything wrong. But some leave there without any changes, but some leave there and you hear them at the end, because I sit outside and listen sometimes. You hear them at the end and they'll say things like, you know, I really didn't know this, right? Like a lot of men don't know, like they don't believe maybe, or maybe it was blind, like they that they've had sex with a minor, right? So most men that engage in and buying access to women and girls' bodies have had sex with a minor, and like in their mind, I don't know if they just didn't believe that. Well, she said she was 18, but she wasn't, right? So instead of catching them afterwards, like through the CARD program, we are working on a male curriculum because that's how we end demand, really, right? We end demand by teaching people like that's not normal to buy access to another person's body. So I'm actually really looking forward to that. So I don't have many like solutions for male survivors. You know, I do intend on really focusing on the male prevention a lot, because I think that will make a significant decrease in the demand.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
Thank you for asking that. And yeah, like Des mentioned, our mission and scope is more focused on female identifying individuals, but we're happy to broker that relationship and introduction to some of our brother organizations. All right, it is going on 11:10 a.m. I want to thank you all for joining us today and hearing us out. And we would love to continue the conversation, offline and individually. We've provided our emails in the chat for you, and I'm sure that this chat will be saved for us by our wonderful conference hosts. Thank you so much to the both of you for helping us out today. We really appreciate it. Please reach out with any thoughts or questions. These slides will be shared. And we appreciate your time today. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much. This was great. You all have a wonderful day.
Take care.